Let's be real, I think we all expected this to become a thing at some point. We've all seen phones go from a name and model number to Pro, X, Max, Plus, Ultra, S2, Lite, yada yada yada. And while watches have had words like professional used in their names for many years, the Tudor Black Bay Pro, released in 2022, was the first time it really felt like this smartphone slang was blatantly latched onto the end of an existing model name. But now, you don't have to be rich to afford a pro-level watch. Well, not quite. This is the Sternglas Naos Pro, the second Pro watch I've come across, but the first one that's well under $1,000 US. It's the successor to the highly popular Naos Automatik that I reviewed a few years ago, which offered an award-winning look and fair specifications for a respectable price. While they told me they don't want to be known as a fashion brand, to me the Naos was a great fashionable watch that succeeded because it didn't skimp too much on build quality and materials, unlike some other minimalist brands whose watches were minimalist for all the wrong reasons. Nevertheless, I was particularly excited when I heard about the Naos Pro, because the base model it had several clear areas for improvement. While the quartz version of the Naos was very thin, the original Naos Automatik was far from that, with a chunky, bulbous exterior that did detract from the sleekness. Additionally, it used the movement I would come to hate, the Miyota 821A, and Sternglas completely bypassed lume in the pursuit of the cleanest look possible. The Naos was essentially invisible in the dark, so yeah, too thick, no lume, a mediocre movement, and clear room for improvement. When they showed me the spec sheet for this new Naos Pro, I was pleased to see that all of those things seem to have changed. A thinner case, added luminescence, and an upgraded movement. However, something else was also upgraded: the price. Indeed, at the time of recording this, the original Naos is sitting at £339 in the UK, while the Naos Pro is almost double that at £639. Neither of those prices including any newsletter discounts. So for that much extra, is this really a pro-level watch with pro-level upgrades? Or is it simply a process to procure some more money out of you? Well, there's only one way to find out. So the watch arrived in Sternglass's new packaging, which most of the models seem to ship in now. Sternglass provided this review sample, by the way. I don't think I have to send it back, but they also had no say in this video's content, so I can say and do what I want with it. The new box is much more distinctive and on-brand, giving a less generic first impression that'll make it a touch better for gifting, I'd say. It's also fully recyclable, which I won't complain about. As you might have guessed, for an iterative design, the Naos Pro looks a lot like the regular Naos straight out of the box. It's got a near identical dial layout, and from above, provides you with essentially the same look as last time. Nevertheless, you can immediately feel one difference in the hands. It's not often I start with straps here at Ben's Watch Club, but I wasn't expecting much from this one, if anything, as Sternglass weren't pushing this whatsoever in their marketing. In fact, the strap didn't even feature in the press release or spec sheet they sent me, leaving me to speculate it must be similar to the last one, which was decent enough, but would have been underwhelming given the elevated cost of this one. I couldn't have been more wrong though. This new bridle leather strap is so good, they'd probably still make bank if they ditched watches entirely and became a strap company. It's an unusual combination made from British leather by a factory in Bavaria, Germany, with light brown perimeter stitching and quick release spring bars around the back. It's one of those products you pick up and can immediately sense the quality of, especially with the initial firmness offered by bridal leather. More importantly, it suits the styling and feels like you won't need to change it for many years unless you decide to switch up the look. Behind the scenes, I recently purchased a plethora of watch straps from a variety of brands, many of which cost substantially more than this one. Yet this Sternglass strap is surprisingly in the top 20% of those in terms of its construction. To have that as a stock strap on a watch is a surprising treat to say the least. It's a good job the leather band is so good too, because I asked them to provide me with both straps that the watch shipped on so I could review them. And the bracelet, well, look at it. It's far too cumbersome for a watch of this size, and stylistically, it's not a good match either, especially given the complete lack of a taper. For a £50 surplus, you'd be scamming yourself by choosing this option. Honestly, I don't know what they were thinking with that. Just grab the cheaper strap option and thank me later. If you really want a bracelet, I think a thin Milanese style band would be a much more appropriate option. So while the leather strap is a clear upgrade over the original, that's evidently not going to single-handedly account for the big price jump. So what else has changed, and is it worth the premium? Well, the next most obvious switch is the case. Sternglass advertises this case as being 25% thinner than before, and while that might be accurate when comparing just the cases alone, when including the domed crystals on each watch, the difference is more like 20%. Still, that's a substantial reduction in size as far as watches are concerned, and the difference is palpable, as the new Pro version not only looks thinner, wearing closer to the arm, but also has lugs that sit at a much more appropriate height thanks to the less bulbous rear. You get less of that floaty, flying saucer effect basically. In tandem with a mere 42.3mm lug-to-lug distance, you'd think this slimness would render the watch tiny on the wrist. However, the expansive dial and skinny bezel retain the wrist presence of a slightly larger watch, so while the Goldilocks zone measurements are viable for most male wrists, just keep in mind that the watch looks a fraction bigger in person than it does on paper. Overall, it's a very comfortable watch though, aided by that aforementioned strap. The amended case also brings with it two other changes. This Pro, even with a heavier strap, is 3 grams lighter in the stock configuration, which does improve the balance, and from side on, the slightly enlarged crown also sits more centrally, which I think looks better. The case finishing is also substantially different. The polished finish may have suited the regular Naos quite well, but it also looked simplistic, lacking the finesse or complexity typically indicative of higher-end watches. The Naos Pro takes some steps to alleviate that, with a brushed main case sandwiched between the polished bezel and caseback. And while this does add some more visual interest from a distance, I still think it looks a bit run-of-the-mill. I wonder if a more angular approach or maybe some extreme matte blasting across all the surfaces would have paid dividends instead. I mean, it's not bad, it just feels rather safe. The Perrin Regia that I featured in our newsletter a few weeks ago comes straight to mind, offering a remarkably clean blasted look that may have gone with this design. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest affordable watch releases, by the way, you should definitely sign up. It's free, it's called In the Loop, and I'll leave a link to it in the video description. It's the first newsletter that's really dedicated to low-cost watches, and the feedback's been great, so you should enjoy it. Anyway, the movement powering this watch is much more eye-catching than the case. Indeed, when you flip the watch over, you're met with the striking gold and black color scheme of the rarely used Miyota 9015 gilt version. While not a super high-end movement, as the flashiness may initially have you believe, this movement is still a decent choice that provides you with a smooth second hand and reasonable accuracy in a very compact package. It's one of the reasons they were likely able to reduce the thickness so much with this Naos Pro. Sternglas has even gone a step further by adding a very tasteful custom black rotor with gilded text that completes this luxurious facade. I get a real 20s high-end cocktail bar vibe from this color palette, which is aided by the fact that Miyota went with a nice deep gold rather than the tacky yellowy hue you often see elsewhere. I've shown this watch to several people so far, and every last one of them commented on this rather unique inclusion. From memory, I think it's the first one I've reviewed on this channel. That said, for the most part, you'll likely be looking at the upper half of the Naos Pro. Like the original, it's got a domed sapphire crystal that's susceptible to circular lens flares, which you might see in some of this B-roll footage, but in general it's surprisingly glare-free considering the raised profile, much more so than loads of the domed crystals I've reviewed recently. It's likely the same piece of glass as used in the last model, but what sits beneath is definitely slightly different. The most distinctive element of the Naos design has been carried forward. The inset chapter ring, segmented by elongated hour markers that stretch right to the circumference. While similar designs can be found on a handful of Junghans watches, the Naos is by far the most extreme interpretation of this that I've seen on a minimalist watch, and I think it still looks great. It's a clean, simple design that avoids looking generic thanks to this atypical layout, a common pitfall of upstart brands. I'm no designer, so I can't speak on the exact technicalities of such a simplistic dial like this, but it's clear the design community also loves this look, given the 2 awards the Naos has received. All I'll say is that from above, the proportions seem bang on, and it feels like an incredibly versatile design that suits casual use just as well as formal occasions. Now, following some legibility complaints, Sternglas has slightly thickened the markers on the Pro model, and they also switched up the handset a little. The first iteration of the Naos essentially has 2 naked, super thin sticks, which work with the design, especially with the thinner markers, but they lacked luminescence and did look a little cheap up close. This new version has marginally thicker pencil hands with strips of luminescent paint in the center, giving the Naos Pro some reasonable low light visibility, especially when combined with the lume pips at 3, 6, 9, and 12. The black outline also prevents the hands from blending into the background, as may have happened otherwise with this particular color variant. This is the Alabaster, a cream tone featuring a microflecked surface resembling a rock of that same name that was widely used in ancient times for carvings and ornaments. This isn't an actual piece of alabaster, it's just styled to look like it. Now, genuine mineral dials have their advantages and disadvantages. It's pretty cool if a watch uses the real natural material in its construction, and you'll often get a look that's exclusive to your unit. That said, the side effect, as I covered in my jade dialed San Martin unboxing, is that the randomness of minerals can land you with a watch that looks much different from what you see in the photos, with unsightly dints or unlucky layouts that could result in an uglier overall appearance. While this dial may not be a real mineral, it does at least sidestep that last issue with an even consistency across the surface, giving you a predictable appearance from unit to unit. You won't have to worry about your watch looking wildly different than this one. Despite being a little numb to it when I first saw the online listings, I've grown to like this particular colour quite a lot. The textured effect also makes the Pro's dial look higher quality than the very plain dial of the regular Naos, and I've found the colour just as versatile. It also combines nicely with either the black or the brown strap. Nevertheless, I can't help but feel that the geometrically precise design of the Naos makes it one of the few that can pull off the starkness provided by bright white, a colour I otherwise tend to steer away from as it often leaves watches looking either too dressy or just too plain. It's hard to find a good-looking white watch that offers such a level of flexibility, so it seems a shame to skip over one with this Pro version. Of course, the regular Naos is still available in white, but the Pro's selection is limited to just two colours at present, the other being a grey-black named Anthracite, which ships with a variety of Bauhaus-inspired coloured accents which you're either going to love or hate. These primary colours were widely used together by designers in the early 20th century, but could be seen as a little bright today, partly due to their widespread usage by low-cost and youth-focused brands, including toy manufacturers and fast food. As such, I think the Alabaster is comfortably the classier of the two and the one I'd go for. Meanwhile, the original automatic and quartz Naos watches have since been released in a multitude of dial colours, potentially broadening their appeal in comparison. I'd love to see more options available for the Pro in the future, but I guess they wanted to avoid the overlap and prevent having a near identical looking, cheaper alternative. Of course, there are also some more subtle differences that you may have caught onto. The main one is the date window. The Pro has a metallic frame around it, usually indicating a high quality watch. Nevertheless, my wife and I both prefer the border-free window on the regular Naos, which we feel is better integrated and maybe closer to pure Bauhaus. The silver border on the Pro is the only metal appendage on the whole dial, which draws your eye, and while it's potentially better sized, it also sits deeper, losing the sleekness of the near flush window on the original Naos. Additionally, this unit appears to be tilted anti-clockwise slightly, while the rest of the dial appears pretty straight. This QC error is really minor, but you can see it if you look for it. Thankfully, the Pro still has minimal text usage and the same clever text placement. You'll notice that Zeitmesser is deliberately presented below Sternglas in a smaller font, creating this natural V shape that slots in flawlessly between the hands when set to that famous 10 past 10 position. All the typefaces are attractive and inoffensive, which has always been a strong suit of this brand as well. The brand name Sternglas apparently translates to star glass, if you were wondering. Before I sum up though, I've got to talk pricing and competition. You see, as I anticipated, the consensus among commenters on my unboxing video is that the watch looks good, but is too expensive, with many indicating that for this price, they'd rather opt for bigger, more established brands. And I absolutely get it. I also think a more appropriate price for this would be somewhere in the ballpark of $449, maybe $499, not £600 plus. Though I would be willing to pay the asking price if the watch were even thinner and made in Germany as well, because from what I can tell, this Pro is still made in the Far East. That said, we onliners seem to be the vocal minority in this, as sales don't seem to have been negatively affected by this higher price tag. Clearly, plenty of people feel the design and upgrades warrant this bigger RRP. I think it really depends on how much you value brand heritage and history. Obviously, other brands have the edge on Sternglas, which was only founded in 2016. But in terms of the actual product offered, Sternglas doesn't have a great deal of competition. Most lower-cost minimalist watches are either blatant clones of luxury watch designs, are much more generic, or offer far worse construction. Outside of that, you have brands like Junghans and Nomos, which I keep seeing frequently mentioned as better alternatives. But the price tag of those is just not even comparable. Maybe years ago, those two were trading blows at this price. But nowadays, you'll struggle to find a quartz Junghans max bill at this price, let alone a Nomos, which starts at around triple the cost of the Naos Pro. Even then, the likes of Nomos and even Stoa have substantially different styling. At the moment, those ones certainly aren't to my taste. I mean, maybe the quartz max bill is worth considering. It does have advantages over the Naos, particularly in the case department. That one is far thinner, as is the more expensive manual wind version, with the huge bubble crystal making up most of the watch's listed thickness, giving a much sleeker on-wrist look. Nevertheless, it's still not a like-for-like comparison, as the much cheaper Naos Quartz already has some of those same benefits at an even lower cost. Their main rival in this 300 to 700 quid range would have been Junkers, known for their solid, German-made watches and ties to legendary designer Hugo Junkers. However, they recently shot themselves in the foot, rebranding as Iron Annie in most regions, likely a move to avoid the association with the word junk in English-speaking markets. Now, while I can understand why they did this, I still think it's a massive fail. Iron Annie both sounds and looks worse than Junkers, and it lacks the iconic designer's name to boot. If you're unfamiliar with the Iron Annie aircraft or the brand's history, which is highly likely, you'd probably assume it's just another badly named Chinese brand. Unless you can ship one from overseas with the original branding, I think they're immediately out of contention, leaving Sternglas as the de facto winner with unique original designs and decent sizing in this middle-of-the-road price bracket. It's nice to have a selection of watches that don't just look like clocks, right? We've all seen the offerings from Tissot, for example. They just look like wall clocks with a strap attached. For me, the Naos Pro is a clear example of a watch that is worth it if you can get it substantially discounted. I'll link it in the video description so you can check current pricing and if they got any deals on. As for the Pro banner, I think it's somewhat deserving of it. As the watch, it is generally better, but I'd love to see Sternglas attempt a substantially thinner hand-wound option or something at either 38 or 36 millimeters to see if they could match Junghans in that department as well for less money. For now, here's my review of that Junkers watch I mentioned earlier before they tried rebranding. Go see how that one compares. That one's a looker too.